Thank you for the introduction, Ann. So I'm Brian Reed. I work at Now Secure. I have been in mobile and security since the BlackBerry was born. So that makes me an old mobile dinosaur. Today, I'm going to talk about creating an IoT connected mobile app compliance program leveraging the OWASP MASVS, otherwise known as how to take an OWASP standard and use it to create a new certification regime. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Now, about 12 hours ago, 12 and a half hours ago, this awesome 20th anniversary event kicked off. And one of the first presentations was Sven and Carlos giving us an update on the OWASP mobile project. And I'm guessing a decent number of people who were here were not up with me at 4 a.m. Eastern time this morning to go through that. And I understand, very much if you're not deeply passionate about mobile, you may not have been there. But I took the liberty of snapping a couple of screenshots on their content, and I have them here. And for those who know the OWASP Mobile Project, the two core pillars of the OWASP Mobile Project are the MASVS and the MSTG. A lot of work, a ton of work has gone into MASVS and maturing MASVS. This morning, Carlos and Sven talked about updating the MSTG. And so if you're used to the MSTG, it is a less formalized, more manual-oriented document. And the process of managing and updating the MSTG is not quite as well organized, nor is it as automated in the Git repo as MASVS. So they rolled out a new architecture this morning. And so now you can see there's a more organized structure here in terms of creating the MSTG and updating the MSTG. So looking at it from both the fundamentals and then getting into test cases, testing techniques and tools as well, all in a much more organized fashion. So you're going to see this evolve. This is one of the next big projects that the team is on going forward. And there was another interesting thing. They actually had their own. Now, if you're a mobile person, you know all about Steve Jobs. One more thing. Some rebranding is going on. So these are actually, this is the cover art for the MASVS and the MSTG, and some graphical updates, as you can see from the last slide I showed you, as well as this slide, of some changes there as well. And so I thought it'd be really great to give folks a quick update on the OWASP Mobile Project here before I get barreling into my own. We started a few minutes early. And so what I'd like to do now is transition into my own content. If the replay is available or you can get your whole hands on the slides from earlier this morning, I do recommend you have a look at it. Huge thanks to Carlos and Sven for driving the OWASP Mobile Project, chairing it. Both of them have been involved for many years and are continuing with all kinds of excitement to drive it forward. So want to talk about how an organization and how a community can take the 20 years of history of OWASP and the maturing processes and documentation of OWASP and use it to create new compliance regimes. And so a couple of years ago, a group got started, about a year and a half ago, a group got started saying we need something for mobile connected IoT and VPN. And so a group of us got together and started working on that. I want to share the story today. And it's kind of a different kind of perspective that I think is ideal for really the legacy of what OWASP has created. Now, just briefly, as I was introduced, I'm the Chief Mobility Officer. What the hell does that title mean? What that actually means is I've been doing mobile longer than my kids have been alive. And from that perspective, whether you look at BlackBerry, which is the original mobile security company, all the way through to where we are with iOS and Android today, it's been really quite a journey. And I've been very excited to be in the core of many of the businesses that have driven that and partnered with Apple and Google and the other organizations along the way. My particular company, we're actually the lead financial sponsor and have been since the inception of the OWASP Mobile Project. We also participate in creating tools for the OWASP Mobile Project, evolving the MASVS and the MSTG. If you know Frida and Radare, sort of the world's top reversing and disassembly tools, the research teams that created Frida and Radare are members of our organization, Frida and Ula and Pancake, for example. If you know them, we work with a lot of that kind of who's who. So if you need help with mobile AppSec, clearly mobile is here for us. Now, to kind of tee this up, we spend so much time, many times, thinking about the world economy driven on web apps, but the reality is that 69% of all digital time and traffic now actually is mobile apps, and mobile apps now dominate usage in the marketplace. There were actually 130 billion apps downloaded during the pandemic last year alone, and it drives billions in economic value. And so mobile is there. And much like, 15, 14, 13 years ago when the mobile project got started, the reality is that 85% of all the apps we test, and in fact, 85% of the millions of apps in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store have security vulnerabilities. In the web world, we talk about cross-site scripting. Well, in the mobile world, insecure network connections and insecure data storage dominate. And in fact, 70% of those leak private data as well. And so the security issues for mobile apps are as big or more and as prevalent or more as they are in the web world. And that's why the OWASP mobile project got started. And that's why so many of us are investing in evolving that project. Now, if you've done pen testing in mobile or you've dug into some of those scary stats, what you find is about half of mobile apps have insecure data storage, 48% leak data over the network, insecure networking. The good news is most of them are good at authentication and authorization, and about 47% of exploitable extraneous functionality that shouldn't be there, right? So those are some pretty bad stats. We do benchmark and analyze the app stores. I'll give you a link to get to the benchmark analytics at the end here if you want to see it. But the reality is that much like we all talk about cross-site scripting as being an example for web, the prevalence is there. So last year, a group of us got started with an organization called IoXT looking at IoT connected mobile apps. And 3 years ago, an organization called IoXT created a standard for certifying the security of IoT devices and started thinking about what happens with mobile apps. And if you dumpster dive into looking at mobile connected apps, so those are apps that talk to things in your house. Those are apps that talk to iRobot or talk to your car, like Ford or Tesla, or talk to industrial production equipment, HVAC in your building, what have you. So both industrial, consumer apps, and many different kinds of things. What you find is they're pretty bad too. And so while we're scared about, we're concerned about, and we're starting to publicize about issues of IoT devices being insecure, the reality is mobile apps are insecure too. And those mobile apps that connect to them are often the breach angles. And so in benchmarking about 250, 270 of the most prevalent common apps, we found about 87% had data storage issues, encryption issues, and so on and so forth. Some of them did a really great job with credentials, which was awesome, and authentication again. So those sides are being addressed pretty well. There's a link to this benchmark you can see that you'll be able to go to afterwards to kind of understand it. So what do we do about this? So IoXT formed over 5 years ago. It's really the who's who of all of the IoT device manufacturers. You have Google and Amazon and things like Ring Doorbell in there, Sonos and numerous consumer and industrial IoT organizations are part of it. And it's a standards body that created a certification regime for IoT things. And they've done certification regimes for a number of other things, but they're founded on IoT device certification. So a group of us, Google, Amazon, Now Secure, NCC Group, 7Layers, and Durka, with a handful of others in review, got together and said, hey, what can we do about creating a certification regime for mobile apps that connect to IoT devices? And while we're at it, some members of the VPN community joined as well. And we said, okay, so mobile apps and mobile VPNs, what can we do about that? And so the group got together and got started on a project. And I'm going to take you through the story of the project. So what was the objective? Well, the objective was to create a reasonable, reliable industry standard to build, test, and certify the security of mobile apps that connect to, directly to, or through cloud services to IoT things and VPNs. And I think the key word here is certify, right? So there are existing standards like OWASP on how to build and test, but there is no publicly available and publicly agreed to certification regime. And because IoXT was having a lot of success with certifying the security of devices, they thought it would be logical to then extend that to things that connect to devices, which are mobile apps and other things. And so we got together, started working through this, and with many of the device vendors right here with, for example, Google and Amazon. And so, the first series of brainstorming sessions were, well, should we build this from scratch, right? And I don't know how many of you have ever been a part of coming up with a new idea, but for some reason, most of the time we tend to start with, well, let's build from scratch, right? And you start putting ideas on the board and you start thinking through the semantics of it. And you think about, where's the edge of the envelope and all the rest. And that kind of, after a meeting or two, moved pretty quickly into, well, maybe it'd be better if we started with some existing standards or regulations. So we went over to Europe, we looked at the ISO stuff, we looked at CIS, and here in the States, we looked at NIST and we looked at OWASP. And in doing all of this, there were pros and cons for, leveraging the different regimes. And, depending on your organization, for example, you might be, using the MITRE ATT&CK framework or some of the NIST standards or the ISO standards in your organization as a security framework overall to protect your enterprise. And so going through it, it became really pretty clear pretty quickly that OWASP was the place to go, and MASVS was the real foundation for us to take what MASVS was, make extensions or modifications to it for what's relevant to what's relevant to IoT devices and VPNs, and extend it into a certification regime beyond a security standard and testing regime. And we who are sponsored the mobile project and very deep in it, our friends at Google who are huge on leveraging standards in OWASP and some of the others said that's absolutely the way to go. Here we go. Now, as we started merging in the VPN stuff, we grabbed some core components from the VPN Trust Initiative as well. And so what I'd like to do is kind of walk you through how we went about doing this. So first, we took a look at the OWASP project resources. And clearly the MASVS and the MSTG are the core. It's evolved a lot since the OWASP Mobile Top 10. So we started digging into that, right? And if you've been through the MASVS and you've been through the MSTG, you'll be familiar with some of these things. So OWASP, the MASVS, the project team recognized in the OWASP Mobile project that really there were 4 levels and categories, right? So we had this basic L1, which is a standard level of security that meets a certain, we'll call it a low threat model threshold. And then L2 is this idea of defense in depth. So if I have regulated data, if I have compliance and so forth, that's more than a simple app. So, simple MASVS L1 security standard app might be like book a conference room app, right? And or look up a map of a building. The level 2 might be book a conference room. But now when you get into something like a financial app, or maybe you get into a mobile connected app where the mobile app is a blood pressure or a blood insulin injector type of thing, you need resilience. And so the L1 plus R and L2 plus R was really looking at resiliency with the idea of a self-defending application. So if I'm L1, I'm at a lower level, but I have some IP protection and maybe some malicious modification. If I'm L2 plus R, now you're into doing complex activities with sensitive data and where sensitive data and IP protection really are critical. So think of your classic banking app. Think of the app that drives industrial machinery or manages and maintains an airplane, right? Those kinds of things need the highest level, which is L2 plus R. And so working through the MASVS levels, we're like, okay, we need a leveling system. We need to think about resiliency. We need to think about a structure to that. Further, we looked into the domain. So MASVS has 8 domains, right? And so we're looking at everything from architecture and threat modeling all the way through data storage, into cryptography, into authentication and session management, into the network layer, environmental interactions, right? There's some unique characteristics of a mobile device versus a laptop or a web environment. Everyone needs to worry about code quality. And then obviously there's that resiliency, the plus R here that we talked about earlier. Now, if you remember my stats earlier, basically data storage and network communications are a train wreck in mobile. And so we needed to think about that as we got into the mobile connected IoT and mobile VPN side of the house. You may also remember that authentication and session management were actually pretty good from that perspective as well. And so we're working our way through this. We're looking at those benchmarks and the analytics of analyzing the mass scale of IoT connected apps and VPN mobile apps and things like that. And so we said, okay, let's create a regime now that will meet our requirements. So within IOXT, there was already a structure. Within MASVS, there was already a structure. So we wanted to harmonize and bring all of that together, which is what you'll see here in the picture. And so we settled on, while MASVS had, over 80 requirements, we settled on 30 key requirements that are truly relevant to an IoT and a VPN world, and organized them across 8 pledge categories. Now, some of the pledge categories I'm going to show you in a minute are the same as what's in MASVS, and some are different, right? Because they're more relevant to certification-oriented regimes that are beyond traditional security requirements. Now, one of the core characteristics here was recognizing that if you're going to have a certification regime, it's very brutal if you force everybody to meet a common bar. The reality is, in many ways, a number of other types of certification regimes enable different levels. So you can be sort of lightly certified versus middle certified versus deeply or heavily certified. And so what we did is created this ability to have different levels, and there's mandatory levels. It's that minimum bar that everybody has to meet. But the optional levels really enable organizations to choose, right? So as a developer in building a new mobile connected IoT app, I can choose whether I want to be highly differentiated by providing a super high level of certification, or maybe a lower level of certification for a lower bar. Maybe I have a more economical or a cheaper product. Maybe I charge a premium for the higher level. And then for the consumer, that gives them transparency. Oh, this is a level 1 or 2 or 3, right? Depending on which level, now I understand what minimum bar they meet. And so it's really great for both the consumer and the vendor having this levels of differentiation. Now, in order to be successful, what we learned from IoT device certification is really need to establish some policy requirements, not just security requirements. And we'll show you those in a second. And as part of that, then, as I mentioned before, having this notion of minimum certification requirements. And so when we think about MAS and MSTG, organizations just use them as a testing regime, but there's no like public mechanism or standard way to say, hey, I passed these components of MSTG, that makes me this sort of certified vendor according to OWASP. That's not the premise of OWASP, is to certify people. But the premise of the IoT world is to certify people. So we build on MASVS and MSTG, and we actually create certification requirements. And then, of course, there were some things that are kind of unique to IoT and VPN. We wanted to make sure that the right elements were in there. Sometimes those are sub-descriptors or test case scenarios that are specific to something related to IoT or VPN that maybe doesn't exist in the broader world of more general applications. So I'd like to show you what this looks like. So first, we have the application profile that was created, and it's a simple 19-page document, very simple compared to the thickness of MAS and MSTG. However, inside it's footnoted everywhere with links and credits back to the MASVS and the MSTG. So along with the application profile, we have a compliance test case library. So basically, like there's an MASVS and MSTG, there's the profile and there's the test case library. And inside the test case library, there are references to the MSTG, much like they're inside the profile, there's references to the MASVS. And so as we jump into this, here you can see very specifically in the testing guide, here on the left, we're at UP 103, so authentication of remote services. And you'll see the description of how to test and what are the requirements for building and testing the application. And all the footnotes link back to something in the MASVS. For almost everything in the testing guide here for IOXT, there is a link back to the MASVS or the MSTG as a source or reference point for more information. And so we found this very synergistic pattern means that any development team using the MASVS and any testing team using the MSTG can very easily move into and take advantage of IoT certification because there's such a commonality between the two. They just need to adapt to some of the unique differences that I'll show you as well. So much like the OWASP MASVS has the 4 boxes, here we have the mobile application profile. There are actually 8 sections at the bottom. And as you can see in each one, there is a stack diagram that basically represents different levels. And so the levels escalate as you go up. So deeper and deeper, more sophisticated requirements, higher degree of security certification occurs as you move up in each of these sections. And then within each section, you're going to notice some things as well. And so I'm going to kind of peel this apart. So in my build here, the first thing we're going to see in the build here is to go in the top right, we have the required yellow arrow. And so as you look through each section, there are minimum required standards to achieve IOXT certification. So for example, if I look at the secured interfaces, you can see that SI1 and SI2, SI110, 111, and 112, those are all required. Now the level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is based on some core IOXT standards and certification levels. So the red, the sort of pink, fuchsia, blue, gray, orange mapping maps across other types of IOXT certifications. And then as you level up, you've got the MASVS items pulled over. And so you can see, for example, for secured interfaces, that you actually have to have all the way up to that bar. Now, that's minimum required certification. Now, if I want to enforce, if I want to achieve the higher level, the level 4 certification, then that means I need to incorporate SI 113, which is basically enforcing X509 certificates. And so we can walk our way across this from a password level through cryptography to security by default to verified software, automatic software updates, vulnerability reporting, and security expiration. We can see that there's varying levels of requirements within each of these. And those varying level of requirements are, again, getting to minimum requirements that then are predictable and consistent for the audience. Now, as we dive into this, there's another area of unique additions, and that's really around policy. And so some of the things we have experienced around the IoT side and experienced around the sort of lack in OWASP from MASVS are around these. So verified software, right? So is there something that actually verifies and certifies that anti-rollback is in there, that proven cryptography is in there, that images are signed and verified, and so on and so forth? So verified software is an excellent policy for true in a certification regime. Vulnerability reporting is also important. So do you have a public disclosure program, right? Do you have it in place? Are you running a bug bounty programming? Are you monitoring for it? Can you prove that you're monitoring for it? And so on and so forth. And we believe in responsible disclosure. We do it a lot to help organizations. And this is important really to have an effective program. And then expiration date is also very important. So if you think about a physical device, like if I have a thing, it's got a fixed chipset in it. I may or may not be able to update that firmware, and technology moves so fast that the reality is you should have a security expiration on that. And we should think about it at the software level for applications as well. And so security expiration date is a key difference between OWASP and IOXT, but it's an important difference because that's really enabling organizations to understand how long can I trust this based on the velocity of the market, based on the standard that I use, based on the certification level that I have. And that really forces the upgrade cycles that we all know are so critically important. And enabling people or not including them means that a potential set of vulnerabilities could be introduced, or the opportunity for risk is escalated if I don't actually have a regime that expires. And so that was an important addition as well as we built this all out. And so we're really excited now because here we are, and there's some 50 mobile applications and VPNs that have been certified by Now Secure, but also there's over 200 that have been certified. I failed to mention before that the IOXT mobile application profile regime was announced February of this year, so February of 2021. And so in the first 6 or 7 months, we've had hundreds of mobile connected IoT application vendors, as well as VPN vendors come through the certification process and achieve certification. So it is working very well. It's also been very interesting when we look at some of these policy levels. Remember, we said that the notion of required allowed organizations to meet a certain minimum bar, but organizations could differentiate it. And it's been interesting watching the VPN vendors, for example. Some of the VPN vendors who only met the minimum level recognized their competitors were achieving level 3 or 4. And so from a competitive differentiation perspective, they found themselves at a competitive disadvantage. And so the regime worked because the buyer community could see the differences in certification between VPN vendors. And some of those VPN vendors went back, improved their products, and then came back and got the higher level of certification. And so when we think back to the mission of OWASP and the use of OWASP as a really guiding principle for mobile application developers and for mobile application security testing professionals, the IOXT certification creates a new layer or a new layer of value on top of what we were already doing, adding that compliance layer and that compliance regime to it, which actually really helps drive the market. And so while development teams are working better and security testing teams are working better, now we have an ability to apply certifications to them for the public marketplace. We see this working really well for IoT connected devices and VPNs. We see this going many other places. And so if we kind of think about the evolution now, MASVS and MSTG and the OWASP Mobile Project, they're barreling down the path. They're very mature, but as I showed earlier at the beginning, we're working on some tune-ups for the MSTG. We're working on more tooling. We're working more education and all of those great things. And now it's mature enough that you're able to build certification regimes on top of it, like the IOXT mobile application profile. And where's it going? Well, there's some interesting work going on with ETSI and ETSI EN 303 645. And so there's some opportunity here to build on what IOXT has done with the mobile application profile and testing certification with what ETSI is doing. And we see a good opportunity for those two to compound together and grow things to the next level as well. And so if you're attending this session today because you are in IoT or the VPN world and you've been watching or participating in IOXT, come join us also with the ETSI group. A lot of IOXT members are participating with ETSI as well. And there's likely congruence that's going to happen as these come together organizationally and structurally. So really, it's OWASP, it's OWASP for the win from this perspective. Again, I've been doing standards going all the way back to ANSI and ISO back before I had gray hair. In the late 80s and early 90s, I was in the ANSI SQL standards bodies for 89 and 91. Have worked with other standards groups over the year, a lot of standards related to BlackBerry in the early days and now OWASP in the last decade. And I'm really excited to see how well OWASP was matured, listening to Andrew Vanderstock and the other founders, Mark, who was just before me. It's amazing evolution here. And now we have certification regimes and expanded standards being built on OWASP, which has become the core standards for the world. So we're very excited about that. Got a bunch of resources for you. So if you're interested in Frida and Radari and reversing and mobile testing, you've got some links here. Free to the world. There's been tens of thousands of downloads. Please come participate in those projects as well. NowSecure does a number of crack me's along with spec work. So we recently, as part of R2Con last year, a group at R2 got together and created an Android crack me. So if you're working your way through developing your skills in the OWASP suite, you can go into the OWASP Acme crack me and download it and have some fun with that as well. The R2 community continues to work collaboratively with the OWASP community. I talked about some of the benchmarks earlier. So there's a couple of benchmarks here. So the big one is in the middle, the App Store Risk Tracker. So that is analyzing the millions of apps in the App Store and giving aggregated data around security risks and privacy issues. No, we're not outing any individual vendors, but all the vendors that are top manufacturers and 15 verticals are there that can give you some more background on what's going on and give you a path to testing yourself. Like OWASP, we have a lot of free mobile AppSec training. So NowSecure Academy is a free training environment. If you're new to mobile or a new mobile pen tester, there's lots of courseware for you to learn about it. We're big believers in standards. We're big believers in skills development. So take advantage of NowSecure Academy. You can sign up for free and learn a ton and continue layering into that. If you're a Frida and Radari hounds, we have Frida and Radari courseware coming soon to you as well. If you're a web pen tester and want to learn how to be a mobile pen tester, there's courseware for you there. And if you're a mobile application developer, there's a secure mobile development best practices in there as well. We will be adding IOXT courseware going forward as well. So want to thank you all for joining me today in this track and taking you on the journey of 20 years of OWASP has led to now certification regime where IOXT has been able to leverage the OWASP MASVS and MSTG to turn it into a certification and testing regime for IoT connected mobile apps and for VPNs. And we're super excited about that. Brooke Davis from Google was going to present with me. She was not able to today. But Google's been a big part of this journey and a cornerstone in the journey, and we're glad to have them along for the ride. So I'm all finished today. Please hit me up. I'm going to jump over into, I believe, the topics of interest Slack. And so I'll be there for questions and comments. I will also be posting a PDF copy of this slide deck over there. You can also hit me up at my email address or find me on Twitter. And I'd love to talk mobile AppSec with you if you're up for it. So welcome back, Ann.